It's now almost 3 months since Grace Tame was named Australian of the Year. But in that short period, there has been a seismic shift across the nation. Allegations of sexual misconduct in Parliament, private schools, the Defence Force, all of it has ignited a national debate over equality, consent, respect, sexual assault, the criminal justice system, and triggered difficult conversations and painful recollections. In Hobart, the local sexual assault support service has experienced a significant increase in people coming forward for help, many saying they've been inspired by Grace's advocacy. In Queensland, DV Connect has seen a 42% increase in calls between February and March, and there are similar reports from Victoria.
The stigma of sexual assault doesn't belong to a victim, it belongs to the perpetrator. And it is so freeing for people to finally feel that it's safe for them to come out and to disclose that they're a victim survivor.
Grace, this is really astonishing, kind of witnessing what's going on at the moment, and it's unprecedented in this country when it comes to sexual assault, and much of it inspired by your example of speaking out. What do you make of it, of this mass telling of stories?
Oh, look, it's incredible, and as distressing as this time is in a lot of ways, because like you've identified, we're sort of having a mass disclosure. As distressing as that is, it's so hopeful because this only needs to happen once. Now that people have this social permission to share their truth, we can get all of the information that's born of the lived experience stories, and from that information we can move forward and develop proper education strategies and legislation accordingly. So that makes me incredibly excited. And I'm seeing the change in real time. Every time I step off a stage after giving a speech, I have people come up to me. Not only are they sharing their stories, but they're saying things like, the conversations that I'm having in the workplace have changed because of this movement. The dinner table conversations have changed because of this movement. That's change in real time, and it is overwhelmingly positive.
And you've described it also as like a kind of a mass freeing. What do you think women and men who are speaking out about abuse are freeing themselves from?
Shame. And it's in this, reconnection that comes from having these open and honest conversations that we can properly heal, not just as individuals, but as a collective, and then properly move forward. So it's a freeing, it's a breaking of the shackles, if you will.
Is it shame? Is it blame as well?
Yeah, shame and blame, and we're finding out more about what goes on, the psychological manipulation. I think that's an area that we are starting to see more light shed on, because in the past, we obviously know that sexual assault is an issue, rape is an issue, but there's been a lot of focus on the physical details. But now through these open, lengthy discussions, these honest discussions, we're hearing more about the psychological manipulation. And in doing that, we're able to properly address the unhelpful victim-blaming rhetoric that actually enables predatory behaviour.
And how are you, Grace? Like, does it get overwhelming with being told all of these stories? Even just to report on them from a distance, it can be a lot. That you can carry a lot of or hear and process a lot of people's kind of pain. How are you?
I'm not going to lie, I'm a bit tired. It's been a busy few months. But look, as difficult as it is at times, to hear these stories, a lot of them are horrific. It's a wholly regenerative pursuit, creating change and working in this space, because it's a great privilege when somebody chooses you to be the person that they open up to. And I think that we have to remind each other of that, that it takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of strength to come forward. And so, although I don't have a counselling background, I'm not a therapist, I implicitly offer my support and love, and I'm encouraging people to seek out the right resources and support services, and just take things one step at a time. That's all we can do on this.
And Kate, in your book, you tell a lot of the stories that we haven't heard before about some of the kind of sexualisation of women in politics and the demeaning and the personalising of things and making women seem as though they're not a natural fit in a position of power. So we're also seeing the telling of stories about particularly Parliament, particularly politics. What do you see as going on there, and do you think this is going to have a tangible impact when it comes to the lives of the women that operate in those spheres and beyond?
I think that this movement will absolutely lead to real and meaningful change. And I want to take the opportunity to thank Grace. How incredibly lucky are we as a nation to have her and her courage and the leadership that she's shown. I think that, I mean, Grace has been talking about, obviously, the most brutal end of the spectrum when it comes to the disrespect of women, rape and sexual assault. I guess I was focused in the book on issues that were happening in the Parliament, and one of the motivations for that is because I thought if there is this general culture of kind of low-level disrespect in the organisation that is in charge of taking action, of funding programs, of making sure that support services have what they need to roll out and support the community as they're needed, then that is a very big problem in itself. So I think what we're seeing at the moment is, you know, you talk about the increase in the number of people calling sexual assault support services, but I think that's the tip of the iceberg. Like, there are women across Australia who are disclosing to their husbands, to their fathers, to people for the first time. And the other part of this that's really significant is it means that there are a whole lot of men who in the last couple of months have heard stories they've never heard before and perspectives they've never heard before. And I think it's changing attitudes. I think it's incredibly powerful. I think Brittany Higgins, Grace Tame are just truly remarkable women, and we owe it to them for standing up and telling their stories to make sure that meaningful, real change comes as a result.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, one of the things that struck me when we've had a conversation about do people, you know, what if this happened to a daughter, or what if your son was accused of something, it really did strike me at the time that a lot of fathers wouldn't know if something had happened to their daughters because they probably might not have spoken to them about it. You know, that there's been a lot of women telling family members over the last couple of months, which I think has been hugely significant.
Well, and the other part of that is people are learning that people's reactions to trauma are really complex and complicated. That you know, this is not a simple, you tell someone, you report it to the police, you move on with your life. People deal with this in different ways, and some of those ways are quite confusing to people. So that the greater awareness we have about that, then I think the more comfort people will have in telling their truths.
Right. Now, Faye, this is something that just obviously we've seen marches across capital streets through regional areas. It dominated the news cycle for a good long period. It's slipped off the front pages now. We're obviously seeing the work that Grace is still doing, the momentum, these conversations. Now, if you were an advisor, if this women's movement, this Enough is Enough, came to you as a client and said, what would you advise us to do now? We want to see real change. What would you be saying?
My first bit of advice to them is figure out what it is you actually want. Actually be clear on your objectives and be clear on the outcome that you want. Second is talk to the key players who will actually make the decision, not just the target audience. There's a lot of momentum of support, and often happens when you have mass movements, but because they're directionless in terms of what the actual ask is, they don't achieve, and people get disappointed by the effort, emotional effort they've put into the cause. Third one is be honest with yourselves around the situation you are in and what power you potentially have. Okay, don't presume everybody's on your side. We saw that happen 10 years ago with the environmental movement. Everyone presumed, lost a lot of momentum, because it was unclear in its direction.
You thought that was part of the problem, is that people presuming or just taking it for granted that there would be inevitable
It was inevitable.
progress. Yeah,
it was
right.
inevitable.
Yep.
I mean, you see it now with the Black Lives Matter. Everyone would have said to you 6-9 months ago, something change was inevitable, and they're still struggling because people actually don't know what the change is.
Right.
So what is the change you are seeking? You have to get agreement amongst those people who have taken on a leadership role in the movement. Otherwise, you're not going to get there. I mean, it's a classic. It's very doable. It takes a long time, and we know this. I mean, 100 years ago, Labor movement formed the Labor Party. 60 years ago, the regional issues and rural issues formed the Country and the National Party. 30, 40 years ago, environmental issues formed the Greens Party. Maybe it's time for a Women's Party.
Grace, I could see that you were nodding away when Faye was talking about the need to have kind of tangible goals. You've outlined very tangible goals about the need for uniform national laws on consent. But I want to put to you the question that I was that I put to Faye, which is, we know this isn't dominating the media currently. Other things will come up and preoccupy journalists, but the movement rolls on in many ways. Can you tell us about some of the work that you're doing and what you're seeing?
Oh, yes. Well, look, media coverage, sustained media coverage is not necessarily the only hallmark of success. As activists and advocates the world over know, you know, a lot of work is done in silence. You know, I've got a lot of work ahead of me. I'm meeting with relevant policy and decision makers at the state level and hopefully at the federal level as well, although admittedly I'm disappointed with federal leadership on this issue. The consent campaigns that have come out, the videos.
We're about to get to that actually.
Yeah,
so
very problematic.
Okay. All right. Well, why don't we come up to that in a moment? Actually, before we do, Grace, can you tell us what it is that you want about uniform consent laws? People who haven't heard you articulate that before, what do we need to be looking at nationally? It's a very specific goal.
Yeah, so I do have a really specific, quite simple goal here. I think, well, maybe not simple in actually implementing it, because it will involve getting the 8 states to agree and implement legislation. But so currently we have 8 different definitions of consent across the nation in the different jurisdictions. And it's not necessarily that one is better than the other. It's the fact that we have 8 of them, which undermines our ability to understand the concept and take it seriously. And consent is a concept that is absolute and it's very complex. So I think having a national standardised approach to that is a great place to start, because when we have legislative change like that, that's when you see cultural change, and that's when you can see education improve accordingly.
All right, let's talk about one educational attempt, because in recent months we've also been grappling with demands for better consent education, and we've been talking about that on this show. To help with this, the government has produced some new educational material to guide conversations about respectful relationship. But there is one video that's been circulating today that hasn't quite landed, to put it mildly. It's been labelled confusing and condescending. What do you think?
To cross into the action zone, both people must agree.
Do you want to try my milkshake?
Yes, I do.
Is it better than yours?
You know, I think I prefer mine.
But what happens when one person takes action without an agreement?
You do, huh? Well, drink it.
This is what we call moving the line. When a person imposes their will on you, it's as if they were moving the yes line over the maybe zone or the end zone, ignoring your rich inner world and violating your individual freedoms and rights.
Kate Ellis, this is so weird to me. Can you decipher this ad?
No, I can't. You know, I watched this today, and if it wasn't on such an important issue, it would be amusing because it is so ridiculous. But it actually just infuriated me, because it seems like this is yet another example of where people are more concerned about upsetting those who find it uncomfortable to have real conversations then they're concerned about the people who will suffer serious consequences if we don't have those real conversations. Like I wasn't going to share this on national television, but earlier today my 3 and my 5-year-old boys decided it would be really funny if they kept licking me. And I sat them down and I had a more direct conversation about consent, about respecting other people's wishes, and about being in charge of our own bodies with a 3-year-old than the federal government has put out in this ad, which is for teenagers. I can't explain it. I think it's ridiculous, and I think somebody needs to own up to that. Let's just have a real conversation. If we want to make change, then people need to understand what we're talking about. And I have less idea about consent after watching that video than I did have beforehand.
Yeah, I showed it to my teenager who was like, it's 6 minutes long. She does not have that long an attention span for starters. After about 30 seconds, she's like, can we move along? And she was also very, very confused by it. Grace, what is it? Is there something about tiptoeing about what we actually want to talk about by using a milkshake as a proxy that's a bit odd?
Oh, this video is so problematic in so many ways. I think it's just insulting to the intelligence of everyone, not just adults, to children as well. Like Kate was saying, 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds, I think their intelligence would be insulted by this. It also minimises the experience of rape trauma. It fails to really address the nuances of this complex issue of consent. Also very concerning is the fact that the government claimed to collaborate or have or consult, Our Watch, the peak body in the primary prevention of sexual abuse space on this, and Our Watch have come out and said that they didn't. So that's very concerning in of itself. But I think that this is just, it's indicative of poor leadership, of a poor understanding of how serious this issue is.
Craig, you've got teenagers. Does that make you any closer to kind of fathoming consent when it comes to milkshakes?
I didn't understand it. And in the age of TikTok, I reckon 1 minute's the maximum anybody's got an attention span for. So, look, I don't want to be bashing people about these ads, but I think, it really is an ad that didn't make any sense to me at all. And I agree that we need to have much more direct conversations. But it's almost like, we're skipping this whole broader conversation with the whole community, all of our children, about fully respectful relationships of each other. And consent is one part of that. And I almost feel like I don't even need to have a specific conversation about consent with my son. It's more about the broader relationships. And I can't imagine him not respecting somebody who said no. We've always had in our family a stop I don't like it type arrangement, and that's been respected. So I really don't know where that ad was targeted.
The recent stories and allegations, is that sparking different conversations around the people that you know?
Well, absolutely. I think that the Grace and all of the stories that have come out in recent times have really brought this to the forefront. And I think the comments that were made earlier about what is next, I think, is really important, because now that there's been this galvanised movement, we now need to say, well, what do we want next? What is the next thing? And certainly education is a really important part of that. The comment that Grace made about not having unified consent rules around the country just is unfathomable. We have unified criminal codes, we have unified rules about all sorts of things. How is it that in different states we have different rules about consent? So obviously there's that part of it, but then there's a broader discussion just about respectful relationships with each other, and surely that can start in the Parliament as well.
You've brought up a teenager as well, Faye.
Yes, I have. It's fabulous.
Doesn't this show, though, a real gap between what they're exposed to, how they talk to each other, what they're dealing with, and how we think we might be able to help with those situations? That's a huge gap there.
They're way more honest in their communication than we are.
Right.
And it's about comfort levels. I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of the people who put this together didn't actually want to produce information that would address the issue. They wanted to stay within their comfort levels. So avoid stigma and shame, avoid talking about uncomfortable issues, avoid anything that directly dealt with the situation. And as a result, they ended up with this completely confusing mishmash, which is a module in a bigger piece of work, which makes you question that bigger piece of work, because it's clearly, it's unclear. What's its purpose? Is this designed to spark a conversation, or is it just designed to make the issue go away?
Yeah, I think it's action for the sake of being seen to do something.
Yep.
I think it's that simple.
It's just so, it's the incongruity. So we see the testimony of Grace and we see Brittany Higgins speaking. It's raw, it's powerful, it's what's actually going on, it's what people are actually dealing with. And then this weird Happy Days kind of sitting in a soda bar situation.
I may be super cynical, but I'd love to know when this video was commissioned.
Okay, well, we'll just put that out there and hopefully someone will tell us by the end of the show.
I may